Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you're living in a small village on the coast of England over 1,000 years ago. The morning begins like any other. Fishermen are preparing their nets. Farmers are working in the fields. The sea is calm. Then someone notices something on the horizon. At first, it looks like dark shapes moving through the fog. Then you see them clearly. Long wooden ships, dragon-headed vessels cutting through the water. And suddenly, fear spreads everywhere. The Vikings have arrived. For centuries, Vikings were known as some of the most terrifying people on Earth. Their raids changed kingdoms, destroyed villages, and reshaped the future of Europe. But here's the surprising part. Most of what people believe about Vikings is actually wrong. Let's uncover the truth. First, let's answer the obvious question. Who were the Vikings? Many people think Viking was the name of a people or a race. It wasn't. The word Viking was more like a job or an activity. To go Viking meant to go on an expedition, often involving trade, exploration, or raiding. These people mostly came from Scandinavia, the regions we now know as Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. And despite their brutal reputation, they were much more than warriors. They were farmers, shipbuilders, explorers, merchants, and skilled craftsmen. In fact, Vikings built one of the most advanced ship technologies of their time. Their famous longships were fast, flexible, and incredibly effective. Unlike many ships of the period, Viking ships could travel across open oceans and also move through shallow rivers. This gave them a huge advantage. They could appear almost anywhere. One day, a peaceful village could exist normally. The next day, Viking ships could suddenly emerge from nearby waters. People often had almost no warning. Now let's talk about one of the biggest myths in history. Did Vikings really wear horned helmets? No, probably not. There is almost no evidence that Viking warriors wore helmets with giant horns. The image most people have today actually became popular much later, especially in theater productions and artwork from the 1800s. Real Viking helmets were designed for protection, not fashion. So the famous horned Viking look? Mostly fiction. But while some myths are fake, other parts of Viking history are even more fascinating. For example, Vikings didn't only travel across Europe, they traveled incredibly far. To the east, Viking traders moved through rivers deep into parts of Eastern Europe and reached areas connected to the Middle East. To the west, they traveled across the North Atlantic. And according to historical evidence, Norse explorers reached North America around the year 1000. That's nearly 500 years before Columbus. Think about that for a second. People often learn that Columbus discovered America in 1492, but Norse explorers had already crossed the Atlantic centuries earlier. Now let's discuss something else that surprises many people. Viking society was not exactly what most movies show. Hollywood often presents Vikings as wild men, constantly fighting and screaming. Reality was more complicated. Viking communities had laws. They had assemblies where disputes were discussed. Families mattered greatly. Trade mattered greatly. Honor was extremely important. Women in Viking society could sometimes hold rights that were unusual for parts of Europe during that period. In some situations, women could own property or request divorce. That doesn't mean Viking life was equal or easy. Life was still harsh. People dealt with war, disease, cold weather, and short life expectancy. But Viking society was more organized than many people imagine. Of course, we can't talk about Vikings without mentioning their beliefs. The Vikings followed Norse mythology. They believed in powerful gods and incredible stories. There was Odin, associated with wisdom and knowledge. Thor, connected with thunder and strength. Loki, known for chaos and deception. And they believed brave warriors could enter Valhalla after death. To them, these stories weren't just entertainment. They explained the world itself. Storms, war, death, and fate all had meaning. Eventually, the Viking Age began to decline. Over time, many Vikings settled in new lands. Kingdoms changed, religions changed, trade changed, and slowly the era of Viking raids came to an end. But their legacy never disappeared. Even today, we still see Viking influence in language, culture, storytelling, and history. And maybe that's why people remain fascinated by them. Because the Vikings weren't simply monsters from history. They were explorers standing at the edge of the unknown. They were builders, travelers, warriors, and human beings. The truth is that history is often more interesting than the myths, and the Vikings might be the perfect example.